Welcome back to Candy's Classic Game Shrine, everyone. Today I'm gonna bullshit with you guys about gaming back in the 80s and 90s. Basically the golden age of gaming, at least in my opinion. I might be a little bit biased. It was great. Nintendo was at their peak, Sega was still keeping fans happy, they were still making decent Sonic games, and it was a time when side-scrolling platformers were king. That's not to say that the gaming era was without its faults or hardships, though. You young whippersnappers have it easy in a lot of ways that all of us older gamers wish we had. Now, I get a mixed range of ages on here, so some of you will be able to empathize and add even more to this, while some of you guys are going to be like, holy shit, are you for real? And yes, things have changed a lot, and you'll soon see how. This isn't a video to say one way of gaming is better than another, because honestly, I enjoy both in completely different ways. When I was a kid, if people wanted to game, we basically had to do physical exercise to get it to work before we played. Pin connectors and pins would corrode or wear out, and it would leave us with connection issues with the cartridges. Some people became very creative on how to get them to work, and, you know, thus the blow your cart method was born. Sorry guys, my dog is being a complete prick right now. Just when you thought all the bullshit was over once you got the game to read and actually go on, you had to pray to the Nintendo gods that the games didn't shut off, you know, while you were playing it mid-game, after you just spent 20 minutes getting it to work. Some of you are probably wondering, well, why not just resume from a save that you made? Hate to break it to you guys, there were no save states back then. Game saves were pretty much exclusive to PC games, with the exception of a handful of NES games like Zelda. And those weren't really that good of save features. They relied on batteries, which eventually ran out, and you'd lose your save feature, or your save file, when that happened. To get around the lack of save files, sometimes you would get passwords. Now, in principle, it seems like a really awesome idea. You get a password, you can continue right where you left off. However, it's just, half the time the passwords were a gazillion characters long, numbers, symbols, lowercase, uppercase, and sometimes even had a time limit. I swear they did it just to fuck with us. But, you know, that's why warp zones were invented. That way you didn't have to sit through save files or worry about losing your game. In the 80s, for a good portion of the 90s, the internet didn't exist, or just simply didn't contain enough information about video games, unlike it does today. Non-existent were the troves of review sites, leak sites, and there were no such thing as online cheat sources either. We relied on TV commercials, magazine/newspaper ads, video rental stores, and word of mouth from playground/work. That was our source of gaming information back then. Once the internet came into play, so much information was spread that was wrong, and it ran rampant, causing false rumors and hoaxes. I recommend looking up the Pokegods and Peekaboo origins. That's some of my earliest memories into internet tomfoolery. Hell, I can make a whole video based on that alone. Something I missed from my younger years was renting games from physical stores. It was always quite the adventure and experience. You'd often find yourself waiting if they didn't have the game, or fighting to get the last copy with fellow people of your neighborhood. Imagine Black Friday every Friday in these rental stores, especially if you were a young kid looking for the latest game release or the latest movie release. But despite all the hardships of trying to rent a game, it was one of the most valuable tools for figuring out what games you wanted to buy and which ones were just a waste of time and a waste of money. It also helped save a lot of money for some of us who couldn't afford a brand new game, since renting was only a couple of dollars for a week versus like $40 to $60 to buy the game, and you may not even like it. Now, another thing that changed was multiplayer. Multiplayer was really primitive back then. You each took turns in many games, and for some you actually played simultaneously, but there was some really cheap cop-outs where you would be directly pushed next to player one if it was a racing game, so you could only come in like second place or first place in a race with a bunch of other people. It's hard to explain. You'd have to experience it for yourself. Other things were second player could control while game player one was playing and screw up the, rhythm of enemies and things like that. Duck Hunt is an example of this. You really didn't have internet back then either. Maybe in the early, let's see. Technically, the Super Nintendo was the first thing to have internet, but one game was only supported. So I would say it was up to the Dreamcast and PS1 era before you got, before you got your standard multiplayer. It took some time, and it was far from perfect. Excuse me. The perception that people enjoy video games, or of people that enjoy video games, has changed completely from when I was a kid. I was considered, in the words of my bullies, a geek, a nerd, weirdo, a dork, and countless other things for playing video games. Especially being a girl, it was very weird for other people to accept that gaming was a thing, especially that women enjoyed. It was not the norm, and you were going to be the least cool person for being into video gaming. As I aged, the attitudes of it changed, but that wasn't until like late junior high school. Now you can't go anywhere without someone chatting about what the newest game on Steam is, or what consoles they have, or bragging about what achievements they got. It's a whole new world that child me would have loved living in. Would have cut back on many years of bullying, too. Something you deal with a lot more of back then than you do now is having to choose one gaming console out of more than 3 other competitors. While the 90s might have been a decent economic time for many, due to prices of new tech like CD drives and such, drove the prices of certain consoles up. So, you would have to choose between the latest Nintendo console, the latest Sega console. At the time, you had ColecoVision and Intellivision. Then it moved on to the CDI, the 3DO, the TurboGrafx, and Sony, and so many other ones, and even more obscure consoles that aren't as well known. Nowadays, it's just Sony, Microsoft, and maybe Nintendo. The landscape of gaming is ever-changing, and I kind of like it with just the 3 people, or competitors now. Having too many consoles to choose from was a bit overwhelming, and most of the time they were a bit gimmicky and sucked, the new ones. But those are just some of the things that I've gone through during my gaming of back in the golden age, and I miss it, but at the same time I don't. Technology has improved retro gaming today, with upscalers. Hell, even emulators have their place at keeping, the older games alive. Some carts get lost. Some carts weren't made in large quantities, and emulation gives people a way to play them. So, with that said, guys, what do you prefer? Retro gaming? New gaming? Both methods of gaming? Discuss in the comments below. Let me know. And until next time, take care.